In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Hour with the Moon. And this time, we don't have any guests.
No. I think we hoped that with this episode, we would encourage people to have a bit of a slower and calmer rhythm now that the holidays are over.
I think they should go like Mad Egypts, personally.
No Mad Egypts. It's so bad for your health.
Since when have I ever been good for my health?
That's true. But it's the first full moon of a new year.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the turning point of the year, and it's a good time to sort of draw in and tell a few stories.
But there is a theme to this one, because I have, for the last, 12 plus years now, been working with the History Press, writing books for them, and I have a new book that comes out on the 8th of January called Scottish Folktales of Love. So this is why I'm going to talk about the books that I have done for the History Press, do a few readings, and tell a couple of stories as well, which for me is much, much easier than reading it, because I'm dyslexic. I read a lot. I mean, I'm, surrounded here by books. So I'm constantly reading. That's not a problem. When I read out loud, I can stumble over words and such like. So to save Rhonda from having to go and do all that editing, I'm just apologizing in advance and saying if I do screw up, then, please be kind.
They will. They love you. But it's a good combination, I think, because it's a little bit like a traditional reading that people give when they've got a new book coming out. And it's also a little bit of storytelling, which is what would be happening this time of year a lot more than in the busy summertime.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the summer, you were busy out with the animals were out, rather than being in the byre. So you were looking after them, keeping an eye on them. And also, there was the hay work. And I mean, even when I was young and it was automated, there was a baler and such like, and a reaper to cut it and all that. It was, it was still labor intensive. These days, just sort of drive around in a tractor and it all gets squeezed into round bales, but in those days it was just small rectangular bales that you had to build in the stooks, and you had to cut the stooks in and build them into stacks, and or put them in the
hay stabbing you all over.
Oh yeah, your wrists were completely scratched to bits. No midges, because it was usually a bit earlier. It was during the school holidays, so. But in the wintertime, folk gathered around and visited, and that's when stories would be told. And gossip passed on and such like. So yeah, it is quite appropriate for the darkest time of the year that people would be telling stories.
Yes, and our podcast, as well as basically our whole Orkneyology sphere, is in a large part, it's about stories, whether it's history or folklore or local lore, how things used to be around here in Orkney and in Scotland. And so, yeah, it's a good way to begin the year.
Mm-hmm. But this story started around 2013, or maybe even as early as 2012. Can't remember. I was contacted by the History Press, just completely out of the blue. Got an email from Nicola Guy, who is a commissioning editor with them and somebody that I have worked with quite closely ever since, and is absolutely fabulous to work with. I mean, they're a really good team there. And I had been recommended to do a book of Orkney folktales for them by the Highland-based storyteller Bob Pegg, an old friend of mine and somebody who I'd been lucky enough to participate in his Tales at Martinmas festival for the Highlands. And he had recommended me to do Orkney. Now, originally, when Nicola approached me, she said, what about doing Orkney and Shetland? The two together. And I said, well, I could do, it'd be easy enough. I could just split it down the middle and, But I said, but I think that we could, it would be better if it just did it as two books, an Orkney one and a Shetland one. And she said, is there enough material for 2 volumes? And I said, there's enough material for several volumes. So, and the person to write that would be Lawrence Tulloch. Mm-hmm. And so, again, this goes by recommendation, word of mouth. I recommend Lawrence to do Shetland Folktales, and I recommended Ian Stephen in the Western Isles to do those island groups, the Hebrides. So he did Folktales of the Western Isles. Lawrence did Folktales of Shetland. I did Folktales of Orkney.
Should maybe explain that History Press is doing still a long series of books where each individual book is a different county or area of. Is it just Scotland or is it all?
No. It's all. It's not actually just the UK. It's Ireland as well, the Republic of Ireland.
Well, yes, and also Iceland now.
Well, yeah, but that's maybe a bit different. But we'll come on to that later. But yeah, they were doing a series of county folk tales. So, as you said, doing all the different small counties and such like. So there is a large collection of these. I mean, I think I have most of them on the shelf up there.
2.5 shelves full.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot. But anyway, Lawrence had already written a book called The Foy, which was his collection of folktales that he learnt from his dad, who had learnt them from his mother, etc., etc. And I had already written the book Mermaid Bride and Other Orkney Folktales. So we approached it differently, the two of us. He wanted to select stories that wasn't in the Foy and have a completely new collection of Shetland stories. I, on the other hand, having tried to gather together what was left of Orkney stories, I had gathered together as many of the Orkney stories as I could find that still existed. So basically, they were all in there. So I wanted to try to make this book a bit different. But I couldn't leave out classics like Assie Partland, the Stoorworm, and such like. But also
Selkie tales, of course.
Yeah, Selkies and Mermaids and Trowers. I mean, if you leave all of those out, you've got nothing.
Right, there's not a lot left.
But then I thought, well, I'll try to make it like a conversation. Mermaid Bride was just, story. Whereas I had little commentaries running between these where I was, like I was sitting by the fire chatting to you.
Yeah, kind of introducing.
Yeah, and explaining little bits at the end of it and such like. So it was more a conversational style. But I also decided to put in extra sort of categories as well of the Orkney witches, witch stories, the devil, and ghosts and shipwrecks, which wasn't in Mermaid Bride. There was one ghost story in Mermaid Bride, but generally it stuck to the supernatural creatures rather than, spirits. And so it was, I hope, a very different kind of book. It came out in April 2014. It was published. I think it was April. And Lawrence's Shetland Folktales came out at exactly the same time. They were both launched they weren't launched together because we didn't do a launch, but they were made...
released.
They were released at the same time. So there is one story in here which I have marked to read because it's a short story. But some of this was about landscape and about natural phenomenon. So this is The Witch in the Wells of Swona. A long time ago, there was a woman who lived on the island of South Ronaldsay who had the reputation of being a witch. She had fallen in love with a young man who lived locally, and her heart burned for him. But the young man was not interested in her, for he was already in love with another. One day, as the young man was down by the shore, the witch came over to him and tried to persuade him to get into a boat that was lying there on the beach. He refused, saying that he was there to meet his lover. The witch's heart filled with jealousy, and a furious rage built up inside her, but she remained calm and smiled sweetly, as though nothing was wrong. When the young girl arrived, the witch spoke sweet words to them. Maybe she used her diabolical art to bewitch them, but eventually she persuaded them to get into the boat with her and go for a row. They left South Ronaldsay and headed west towards Swona. When they were nearing the island, the witch suddenly used all her evil power and caused the boat to capsize, throwing them all into the water. The witch had nothing to fear, for her magic gave her the power to breathe underwater. However, the hapless young couple did not possess that skill, and so the witch grabbed hold of the young man's arm, meaning to pull him out of the water and save him. The man held her arm in a vice-like grip. But he also grabbed the girl that he loved and would not let her go. They struggled for a short time before death took them. But still the dead man's hand held tight to the witch's arm. She struggled and twisted and turned wildly, trying to get free of them. But the harder she struggled, the more entwined she became with their bodies, and she could not break free from them. She is still there under the sea, and she still struggles to be free of the dead, but they will not let her go. Her twisting and turning causes the sea to form into whirlpools that are called the Wells of Swona, and that is her doom for all eternity. So that's
right.
A little story that not in Mermaid Bride, but explaining of how a natural phenomenon is caused, the whirlpools, the Wells of Swona, as they are known. There was another little story just after that, which again, this is what I mean by the sort of conversational style, because it brings in my life story as well, because as I have said in other podcasts, my parents were middle-aged when I was born. My dad was 52, my mum was 41, so he was born in 1911, she was born in 1922. My grandparents were born in the 1880s.
That's just incredible to me.
Well, you had quite a young family. I mean, your mum was teenager.
Yes, they all reproduced when they were real young. So They were.
So,
I think my great-grandmother was born in 1901 or something like that. So. But this is your grandparents were born before that.
yeah, and my dad was born not long after. So, 10 years after your great-grandmother. So, a generation out. This is a story called The Savile Stone. Nothing to do with Chimmy, I'm glad to say. Savile is a farm in Burness in the north end of Sandy, where my dad came from. Again, it's another witch story. There was once a witch who lived in Eddy, whose daughter was being courted by a young man whom the witch didn't approve of. She was forbidden to see him, but of course she still met him in secret. They decided to run away together, so one night she slipped out of the house and ran to meet her lover, who had his boat ready by the shore. They sailed away before the witch woke up and realized what had happened. When she saw the boat away in the distance, for witches can see unusually far, she was so enraged that she picked up a huge boulder and threw it at them. She missed, and the stone landed in a field at Savile and Sandy, and that's how the Savile Stone got there. The truth behind this folk tale is even stranger than fiction. The Savile Stone is an erratic boulder carried to Orkney from Norway, not by giants or witches, but by a glacier during the last ice age. In 1879, work began to move the 14-ton rock 1 mile from its original position on the orders of the laird Colonel Horwood, who wanted it as a feature in front of his house at Scar. A huge cart was built, and a team of local crofters, including my great-grandfather Muir, managed somehow to lever it up onto the cart. Once there, a team of 12 horses had to pull it up the brae. However, the physical exertion was too great, and, in the words of my father, they sprang the horses. They were ruptured with the effort. The cart remained near the top of the brae until the following summer, when new horses were harnessed up to the giant cart, and they pulled it the remaining distance. Only not quite, for the cart broke under the weight of the rock a few hundred yards from its destination, and it has remained there ever since. The remains of the cart can be seen in old photographs, and I once saw a wooden beam running under it one winter when the vegetation had died back and a rabbit hole had exposed it. I've discovered since then that I had 2 great-grandfathers at the moving of that, which would make perfect sense because, you've got quite a few great-grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being, crofters from that area, it would probably be on my paternal grandmother's side of the family, the Tories. But yeah, it's an immense stone, and it was sheer vanity, really, to try to move it while ruining 12 horses as well. He was not a particularly nice one. He was a captain in the cavalry, as far as I can remember, and this is a long time since I did any reading about this, but he married a young woman by the name of Hughes, whose father was an industrialist. And the father didn't trust him because he had a reputation of being a gambler and a womanizer, and he liked to drink. And so he was not exactly son-in-law material, but his daughter had set her heart to him, and so that was that. And when she married him, obviously she was the person bringing the wealth into the marriage. He had nothing. And the father didn't trust him, so he had a little group put together of trustees who administered the funds that he gave them every year. But he also bought them Bournemouth and Sandy. I mean, they had no connections with Orkney or even Scotland.
Mm.
But what I think the reason for him buying the Bournemouth, which was the Trail of Weststove's estate, was the fact that it was a very, very productive kelp shore. And the old man, the woman's father, was an industrialist who I think was in the chemical industries, which would have been extracting chemicals from the kelp. So I suspect that's why they bought that. But he once threatened one of my great-grandfathers with eviction, saying that if he didn't sign an agreement that they would make work in the kelp for whatever sum of money the laird decided to pay them.
Oh, which would be next to nothing, of course.
Mm-hmm. If he didn't sign it, they would have to reconsider the number of crofters they had on their land, because there would be too many. So my great-grandfather hadn't signed this and was summoned to Scarhouse, which, I mean, must have been quite terrifying for them, because, I mean, it's a huge, imposing building. It's a big rambling building that's had bits added on and such like. So going there and having to then, face the laird. And he said that he hadn't signed it because he couldn't write. And his son usually read things for him, and, whether he would sign it or make a mark or whatever. But he offered the laird £1 to let him sit in peace. And this was recorded in the Crofters Commission report, which was published in the Arcadian newspaper. And on the shelf up there, I've got the Crofters Commission reports from there, so he offers the laird £1 to let him sit in peace. And the laird sort of like stomped off in a huff, and then came back in later and accepted the £1. And that's the
He probably didn't have a lot of ready spending money, so it's so tightly controlled.
I mean, you're looking late 19th century. A £1 would have been, not a fortune or anything, but it was nothing like £1 these days, which is basically just a token to get a supermarket trolley, but you would have been able to buy a lot of things with £1 in those days. But there is this wonderful little bit that says, in brackets, laughter in court. So people were having a chuckle about the laird. Anyway, I'm not getting very far with this bloody book, am I? I have a couple of other things marked here.
This is still the Orkney
This is still Orkney Folktales. There was a wonderful story which Walter Trill Dennison had written up as a large poem called The Voyage of Lady Sarah. It's about a young woman who is engaged to be married to a soldier who is away fighting in the war. She lives in Dundee, and she starts to be courted by a sea rover who turns out to be a wrong one. And
What's a rover? Is that different than just a regular sailor?
Well, more a kind of a pirate-y sort of a thing. I mean, a rover is just, or a kind of a privateer or something like that. But a bit of a wrong one anyway. But she runs away with him, and they sail in his ship as far south as Kent. And they're struck by a terrible storm that turns them around and drives them northwards up to the north, in the North Sea. And they pass Dundee again, and they don't want to get too close to the land because he doesn't want her to see Dundee and then maybe have a change of heart and think, I want to go back to my family. So they sail on until they get to the Pentland Firth, and storm is still absolutely raging, and they can't get through the Pentland Firth, and it is known to the sailors as being a most dangerous piece of water, which it still is. Mm-hmm. But then, as they have they've headed back a bit, and then it says, suddenly a beautiful ship passed them by and tried to sail through the firth. She was painted all over with bright colours and looked like a gem floating on the surface of the sea. The ship battled along against the tide, but couldn't get through either, so it turned about and started to sail to the northeast. The rover admired that beautiful ship and ordered his men to follow it. Oh, indeed, because then they go past Stronsay. In Stronsay lived Scotta Bess, a witch who could control the elements, raising both storms and fog at will. She took a seat in the maiden's chair that was cut into the rocks of the Mill Bay, and where it was said if a maiden sat, she would be given the gift of prophecy. Scotta Bess sat in the maiden's chair and watched the ships as they sailed to the north, and an evil laugh fell from her wrinkled mouth. The devil will sing and be merry tomorrow as he enjoys his sport with the souls of that ship's crew. The doomed vessel sailed around Papa Stronsay and into the sandy sound, still following the painted ship. Lady Sinclair sat in her hall at Washiter and Sandy and watched the rover's ship pass by. She had the gift of second sight, and tears filled her eyes as she said to her maids, "There is a man's sworn woman on that stately ship, and she is doomed for the sin that has been committed." The two ships carried on around Sandy as the sun set. The pilot came to the rover and said, "Have you noticed that ship has carried full topgallant sail throughout the gale, but has never been further forward, nor nearer to us than it appears now? I say we shouldn't follow it any longer, for if we were in the southern seas, I'd swear that we were following Vanderdeck himself." But the rover was headstrong and swore that they would carry on, following the ship, as it had been their best chance of getting through the islands alive. "Breakers ahead," cried the lookout. "Breakers on the lee bow." There, before them, they could see the broken water with the jagged rocks beneath it. Lady Sarah and her maidservant were on the poop deck of the rover by this time. The painted ship then sailed before them, suddenly melted away into smoke. A blue flame shot up from the sea where it had been, and it was gone. So, it was a phantom ship created by witchcraft. Vanderdeck is the name of the captain of the Flying Dutchman in the southern seas.
Is that maiden's chair still there?
I don't think it is. I think it's actually been lost to coastal erosion, but it used to be pointed out, but I don't think it exists anymore.
If anyone listening knows better, they can let us know. That would be fascinating.
Well, Stronsay folk can, obviously. Yeah. It was a little feature that the maiden's chair, and also below it then there was a natural spring that was supposed to cure all ills except for the Black Death.
That's a pretty good record.
If it was drank and you also ate dulse from the shore down there and washed it down with that, then it would cure anything.
Wow. This is still in print, by the way, the Orkney Folktales.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, you can still get it. Don't know how much it was. It was $9.99 when it came out, but there was one here about the devil. This is a story that Ernest Marwick had recorded in Papa Westray. But I don't think it had ever appeared in print until I wrote it in here. If I can find what I'm looking for. Now, the laird at the time was Thomas Traylor Holland, whose dates was 1668 to 1694, who was known simply as the Wicked Laird and had a reputation of being having sold his soul to the devil. But then when the devil came to collect it, he refused to go with them, and the two of them fought. And Trail was so evil that he was able to drive the devil down through the ground. And so then that was fine. He was, he was safe.
I don't think I like that ending. It almost makes you grudgingly admire him, but not quite.
Well, we see now that every year the crofters who rented small farms from the laird, and the cotters who lived on pieces of poor quality land and paid their rent in labour, brought the sheep in from the common grazing to shear them. At that time the laird would ride up on his horse and select a fine lamb as a gift for his lady wife. One year his eyes fell on a fine grey lamb that he considered to be better than the others. He ordered that the lamb be brought up to the big house immediately. The owner of the lamb was a poor cotter widower, who had 2 small children to support on his own. He begged the laird to be merciful. "Please, sir, spare me my lamb. It's the only thing that I have in the world, and it's the only hope of keeping life in me and my bairns over the coming winter. Take another lamb, but spare mine for the sake of God." The laird fixed him with a look of contempt, saying, "I don't care whether you or your brats live another winter or not. I want that lamb for my lady, and that is final." Seeing starvation staring him and his children in the face, the cotter pulled himself up to his full height and uttered this curse. "All right, take the lamb, but I'll tell you this. Your lady will never live to see the lamb, and when you die you will go to your grave without a drop of blood in your body." The wicked laird just laughed in the cotter's face, and then turned his horse for home. On arriving at the big house, he dismounted his horse and strode inside. He shouted to his wife, but there was no reply. He went upstairs to her bedroom and found her lying dead on the bed. Her body was contorted, and her face twisted in horror. The cotter was right. She would never see the lamb. And it goes on that the laird gets his comeuppance in the end. And does,
remember the end now.
And does indeed go to the grave without any blood in his body.
It's a creepy story. Good and creepy.
Now, the one story that came completely out of the blue, really, which I had never heard before, and I'm going to have to look it up here. Bear with me, folks. Makes for good audio, doesn't it? Just somebody thumbing through a book. It's called the Kelpie Seaweed, and it's about a man who was the son of a mermaid and a mortal man. But when he was born, the mermaid discovered that he couldn't breathe underwater. So he has to live on land. But she provides him with a kelpie to look after him, so a water horse. And also she picks seaweed from the bottom of the sea that has a magical quality, that it'll cure any ills. And he sells it to the local people and makes his money from it. And then there's a lot more that goes on.
Where did this one take place?
Well, it doesn't say. It's an Orkney story. But I heard it from Chess Smith, who was a traveller storyteller, very fine storyteller. Must get her on here sometime, actually. And Chess has written many books and all that, but she wrote to me on Facebook and said, you got the Kelpie story in there. And I went, what? Because we don't have Kelpie story. We've got Nuclavy, which is sort of a horrible, evil creature. In Shetland, they call the water horses Nuggle, so Nuclavy must be related to that. But obviously, much, much, much more horrible and deadly. And so Chess, anyway, said that she heard the story as a bairn at campfire as a traveller from Orkney, traveller called Newlands, which Nowlan was the main name for the families of travellers in Orkney.
Mm-hmm.
So she told me that story, and I wrote it there. It's the only time it appears anywhere in print. Which led me to wondering whether there was other Orkney stories out there that had been brought by travellers from Orkney, or maybe even brought to Orkney by travellers, which I suspect that there is, and there is one which I will come back to later. But anyway, so that book's out, and I'm just sort of, fanning around here. I've just moved into this house, and you've just hove into view again for the first time in a long while.
2014, right?
Mm-hmm. So everything's starting to happen in 2014. Then Nicola Guy got back in touch and said, we want to do a collection of stories from the Scottish books in a nice hardback edition called an anthology of Scottish folktales. If I was in agreement, would I select 2 stories and write a little introduction about them, or, a little something? So I selected Assie Patland the Stoor one because it is like the classic Orkney story. But then the other one that I chose was called Kate Crackernuts. Now, Kate Crackernuts is a story that has been claimed by the Scots and the English. But they can keep their paws off, because where it came from was Rousey. And it was gathered by a man called Duncan Cheer Robertson, who was a lawyer and was a factor for the estate in Rousey. And he was very interested in folk tales, and he gathered that story and another big long one called Peary Fool. He had other stories too, shorter ones, but there was just 2 big ones. We'll mention Peary Fool again later, but that one was Kate Crackernuts. I mean, it's about a fairy woman. The Queen of the Fairies has abducted a prince. And there's a runaway princess who has gone off with her stepsister, who's had her head has fallen off and a sheep's head is chomped on in place by a wicked, evil stepmother who is Kate Crackernuts' mum. But she loves her stepsister, so she wraps her head up in bandages and takes her away. And she discovers that the Queen of the Fairies is dancing the young prince to death, and she is able to break the spell. And she has said that, she gets a bag of silver for the first night sitting on, a bag of gold sitting on the second night. When the king says, what would you like as your reward for a third night? She says, him. I'll have him. So that was it. So it's a lovely twist from usually it's like you can have my kingdom and my daughter's hand in marriage, as a kind of a throwaway. You can have her as well. Here was a woman who was already a princess who has decided, I want him. But then when I was back in touch with Nicola Guy again, I said, do you just do collections of folktales from Britain, or do you do other ones? And she said, well, they had been thinking about, they had been doing some other countries as well. And I said, well, I've got a pal in Iceland who I mentored as a storyteller many years ago, Hjörleifur Helgi Stephenson, who you can also find on this podcast too. If you go back through it, you'll find Icelandic stories and traditions from him. And so they got in touch, and he wrote a book for them, a collection, Icelandic Folktales. So highly recommend it.
He's working on another book.
He is indeed, yes.
That's another story.
Yes. And it seems this is about the History Press. Well,
Right.
maybe just
we'll
leave
let them
that.
have their...
Yes. But then after that, quite a few years, Nicola got back to me again and said, would you consider writing a book for us of folktales of the coast? And I said, well, yeah, okay, could maybe do that. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, stories of the coast. And I could only think of Orkney ones. So I thought, well, that's not much. Well, not Orkney ones, sorry, Scottish ones. And I thought, well, I could. I mean, it would take a lot of time, a lot of work looking for stories from England, but also I don't know any Welsh stories about. And the coast is so specific because it's, a bit of land next to the sea, so that was difficult. So I said to Nicola, look, what about Ireland? Because you do Ireland as well. And I said, wouldn't that be more appropriate to have an Irish storyteller doing Irish ones? And she said, yeah, I think it would. Yeah, we'll do that. And I said, in which case it would be more appropriate if you had an English person and a Welsh person doing their countries as well, rather than me. And so what was started off as being one book ended up as 4. And I recommended my good friend Colin Irwin as the storyteller for the Irish collection, which they went with. And so he was the person who wrote that. So that was all fine. But then she also said it came in then instead of Scottish Folktales of the Coast. She started referring to it as Scottish Folktales of Coast and Sea. And I went, oh, and sea.
Yeah, that helps.
So that was like a huge weight was lifted off the shoulders. And so I started looking for stories for that. And the one that I found, I couldn't find any around the borders. And I'm sure there must be, but I just couldn't find any. There would be, there was all stories of fairies, and things like Tam Lin and Thomas the Rhymer and all that, so really big stories and ballads about fairyland, but nothing about the sea. So I ended up finding that the furthest on the southeast I could go was Fife. And there was a story from Fife that I found, which I absolutely love, and I have told a few times, and I'm going to tell again now. It's called the 3 Questions. Now, there was a young man who was a fisherman called Davy, and he was married to Margaret, and they lived in a small cottage by the side of the sea. Now, Davy was a fisherman, but he wasn't a very good fisherman. He really had no skill in it, and he had no interest in it. The only reason he was a fisherman was because his dad had been a fisherman and his grandfather had been a fisherman. And so the old man had taken him down to the docks and hired him out to a boat when he was just a young lad. And he went to sea, but all the skippers knew that he wasn't up to much. So he got all the dirty jobs to do on the ships, all the ones that nobody else wanted to do. And the one with the least skill required as well. And he was obviously paid accordingly as well. Now, one day he was serving on a ship, and the net was hauled, and the catch was tipped onto the deck. And it was his job to go through the catch and to throw back the small fishes back into the sea, because the small fishes would grow and become big fishes, and you could catch them again maybe, or they would have, they would have families, and so there would be more young for catching in the future. So rather than just letting them die on the deck, they threw them over the side. And there was also starfish and whelks and things like that. And that was the only part of the job that Davy liked, was throwing the fish back into the sea and letting them live, giving them their life back. And then he had the dirty job then of gutting them before they came ashore. So one day he was picking up the small fishes and the starfish and throwing them over the side when a big fish worked its way up to the top of the pile. And Davy had never seen the like of it before. It was gorgeous. It had blue markings, deep, vivid blue markings, and black mottled as well, and a silver belly. It was very much like a mackerel in colouring, but it was about 4 times the size of a mackerel. Definitely not one of those. And he looked at it and he thought it was so beautiful. It was such a lovely fish that he thought it was such a shame to kill such a fine specimen as this. So he looked around him and he saw that the skipper and the rest of the crew were busy and weren't paying any attention to him. So he took the fish and he slipped it over the side of the ship into the sea. And as he looked down, he could see the flash of silver as the fish swam down to the bottom of the sea. And that felt good. And then a shadow fell across him, and he looked up, and it was the skipper of the ship. He hadn't been quite as sly about this as he thought, and the skipper had seen him, and he was furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he says. "Throwing perfectly good fish back into the sea. How dare you? You're useless." He says, "When we get back, I'm kicking your arse off this ship, and you are never going to work at sea again. I will go around the docks and I will tell all the people there, all the fishermen, all the skippers, not to give you a job because you just waste good fish." And sure enough, when they got back to the docks, Davy was kicked off, no wages, of course. And he set off home knowing that he would be blacklisted among all the sailors and that his time working at the sea had come to an end. And what was he going to tell Maggie? Because he wasn't any use as a fisherman. But it was the only life he knew. He had no idea how to do anything else. So he was walking along very, very dejected with his chin on his breast, looking at the ground, when a stranger fell into step with him. And the stranger said, "You're looking very glum today, Davy. What's wrong with you?" And he says, "Well, so might I be," he says. "I've just been fired from a job on a fishing boat, and the skipper's going to make sure I never get another job again. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to tell my wife. I don't know how I'm going to support us." "Oh, that's terrible. Be bad luck, Davy," says the stranger. Oh, dear. Now, the stranger was leading a cow with him on a rope. And he says, "I'm a nice guy. I like to help people if I can. I have a lovely cow here. It gives the most exceptional creamy milk. I could give you this cow on loan for 3 years. And you could sell the milk and maybe make a bit of a living out of that. Would you do that?" He said, "Oh, yeah, no, I would do that." "Well, what would you want in return?" And he goes, "Oh, nothing much, Davy. It's just, I'll come back in 3 years and I'll ask you 3 questions. And if you can answer the questions correctly, then the cow is yours. I'll leave it with you. And if I can't answer the questions, well, you'll have to come with me and you'll belong to me." Oh, well, he says. Now, Davy wasn't being very observant at that time, because if he had looked at the stranger, he would have noticed his feet. He didn't have any. He had a pair of hooves. And on his head, his brown curly hair, there was a small pair of horns poking up from it. Well, that's very, very kind of you, says Davy, taking the rope from him. And he says, but what's your name? And he says, the devil, and disappears in a puff of smoke and a smell of brimstone and sulphur. So Davy goes home thinking that, he had thought that life couldn't get any worse, and it just had. He had just made a bargain with the devil, and he knew that the devil is not one for making good bargains. So not only had he lost his job, but he also lost his soul. So he went back and he told Maggie what had happened. And, well, to be quite honest, Maggie took it well, because this is Davy we're talking about. I mean, Davy was, she was used to disappointment, was Maggie. He was not just the most reliable of people. And so she didn't mind too much, but then he told her about the cow, and she got interested. She says, where is it? And she says, it's outside. And she went and looked, and she goes, it's a magnificent looking cow, that. And look, her udders is full of milk. I'll go and milk her, see what she's like. So she went and got a bucket, and she milked into the bucket until the bucket was full. And it was frothy, creamy milk. I mean, it was the best that she'd ever seen. So she went and got another bucket, and she milked into that and filled that one too, and there was still plenty of milk. So she went and got the big cooking pot, and she milked into that, and the pot was full. And she filled every little pot that she had full of creamy milk, and the cow was still going, And she says, I've never seen milk like this before. This is wonderful. It's beautiful stuff. It's so rich, creamy. She says, I can make butter, and we can make cheese from this, and we can sell the milk in the market. So the next day she went down to the market with the milk, and she sold it, and she got a good price for it, because when people saw it and took a taste of it, they went, wow, we want that. And soon she had a thriving business. People were there turning up early to try to get there first to buy the milk, because it was so good. The cream from it, she made butter, and she made cheese, which was just so wonderful. And again, she could sell that for a good price. And one day she says, Davy, I've always had a dream. Never thought it could be possible, but I think we might just be able to make it now. I've always wanted a little tea shop for myself that sold cream teas. And now with the milk, the money we make from the milk from this cow, then we can probably afford it. So she went off down to the market and sold more milk for a wee while more, until she got enough money to buy a small house that she converted into a tea shop. And she had the most beautiful cream teas, and she made her own jams as well. And so, she was doing a good trade, and everything was just coming up roses for them. But he had kind of lost track of time, and soon the 3 years was by. It was a day that was quiet for some reason. It was quieter than usual. There was just one man sitting at the table in the corner, not saying much, when the door opened and in walked the devil. Well, Davy, you've not forgotten our bargain, have you? He says. I'm here to ask you your 3 questions. Are you ready, Davy? And the stranger in the corner says, aye, Davy's ready, and that's your first question. And he says, will you mind your own business? No, he says. And that's your second question. And the devil was furious, and he says, who the hell are you anyway? And he says, I am the king of the fish. And 3 years ago today, Davy spared my life. And I have come to pay my debt of gratitude to him. And by the way, that was your third question. And when the devil heard that, he was so furious, he stamped his foot on the floor, and it left the mark of a hoof on the flagstone floor, and he disappeared in a puff of smoke with a smell of sulphur and brimstone. But he left the coup, and so after that, their fortunes just went from better to better, and Maggie had her little tea hut and sold cream teas, and they lived there happily for the rest of their days.
Good story.
So I kind of like that one.
I like that one.
So that was one that was that's in this book, Scottish Folktales of Coast and Sea, which has got a nice cover. It's dedicated to my brothers and sister, in appreciation of your kindness and patience over the years, and for putting up with your feral pity brother. Sadly, though, as we know, my sister Liz didn't live to see it in print. She died of cancer on the 9th of August 2023. One of my elder brothers, Cecil, had also died of cancer in 2010, so there's down to the four of us now. But among the stories, there was this one, which starts with the sea. It's called the Blackthorn Stick. It's from Aberdeenshire. But I just kind of like I mean, it's a great story about a woman who sets off after her boyfriend loses his boat in a storm and tries to make earn their fortune, which she does. The boats left the harbour with the dawn, heading for their fishing grounds in the North Sea. The sun was shining and the weather was mild as the boats sailed further and further away from the coast. But the weather can change quickly, and that is what happened on this day. The dark clouds started to gather and the wind rose, swinging around to the north, bitingly cold, blowing from the Arctic. The wind grew stronger and the sea started to swell with large waves forming. The cold sea spray lashed the faces of the fishermen as they tried to turn their boats back to shore. It was clear to them all a storm was coming that would claim lives. The young fisherman gave the order to turn the boat, but it was too late. The storm hit them with its full fury. The sea roared and the wind howled and the boat started to turn. One was caught by a strong gust and capsized, much to the horror of the young men in the boat. There was no way that they could turn the boat back to try to save the crew in the water. They had to hope that one of the other boats could reach them before the cold sea claimed them. Another boat was swamped by a huge wave and struggled to keep afloat. The young fisherman used all his skills to save his boat and the crew, but luck was not on his side that day. A mountainous wave struck the small boat like an enormous hammer, splintering the wood and turning it right over. The young fisherman found himself being sucked down, struggling to kick off his boots in order to stay afloat. His head broke the surface, and he gasped for breath. The cold was unbearable. His life seemed to be at its end already. He thought of his sweetheart, so loving and kind, and called her name, almost as though he was saying goodbye. Then he felt himself being grabbed by several hands, and he was pulled into another boat. He lay there more dead than alive, as the boat struggled against the storm and headed towards the safety of the harbour. The men who had rescued him brought him home to his parents' house. His mother wept as she stripped him and dried him and laid him in the bed. Memories of her mother doing this for her father flooded into her mind, and they were bitter to bear. The cold had reached her father's vital organs. He hadn't pulled through. So, what happens after that, you'll have to buy the book. But it is about the dead rising again as well.
Cool.
So it is kind of cool. Another story which I tell in that book, which is a story from Caithness. Now, I only knew it from the folklore of Orkney and Shetland, which by Innes Marwick, which you may think was all got to do with Caithness stories, but it was just the outline of a story, and I don't know whether it appears anywhere else, but I decided to flesh it out and give it form. But it's about a young man in Caithness who was very good looking and very handsome, very strong, very muscular. And all the girls admired him. And all the girls would have been very happy if they had been asked to walk out with him. But his good looks had also caught the attention of someone else. A mermaid that lived in the sea had fallen in love with him. And she would watch him strutting around the shore. Bit of a peacock he was, He was good looking and he knew it. And she would watch him as he would strut around, and she admired him. She loved him. She thought he was just the most wonderful, beautiful man that she'd ever seen. And she knew that she would never be happy unless she had him. So she bided her time until one day he was down by the shore and she was able to swim over towards him and then pull herself up on a rock. And she spoke to him, and he looked at her, and he thought that she was the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen. And she sang a song that enchanted him as well. And she spoke and said, "I've watched you from afar for many, many years, and I have grown to love you. If you come with me and marry me, be my husband, I will take you to live with me at the bottom of the sea. And you will be an important man, and I will make you very, very wealthy." Now, he didn't think too much of the idea of going to live at the bottom of the sea, but she had piqued his interest with the mention of being made wealthy. How wealthy? Very wealthy, as rich as a king, she would say. Really? "I'm not sure that I'm ready to go and live in the sea with you yet," he said. "Well, if you come back the same hour tomorrow," she says, "I will give you a gift I think you might like." And so he went back the next day, and she sat on the rock and she sang a song which was beautiful and enchanting and sweet, and it carried his heart high. But his heart was hard as well, and he wasn't going to fall too easily under her spell. But the gift that she brought with her was silver. She cascaded silver coins on the sand, and he threw himself down on his knees and started to greedily gather them up while she laughed. Now, the coins themselves were of an antique design, not ones that he'd seen before, but had obviously come from a ship that was on the bottom of the Pentland Firth. And he gathered up the silver and he took it with him down to the tavern that night. And, silver. It might not be a coin that was in circulation, but they could weigh it out and figure out how much it was worth. And so the ale flew freely that night. And he was always the one that was treating all the guys that would come and drink with him, which he had no shortage of volunteers. He had plenty of friends as long as he had plenty of money to buy them drink with. Now, soon the gold coins started to arrive as well. She would scatter gold onto the beach, and he was even more enamored with that. But he still kept telling her that he wasn't quite ready to leave the lad yet, implying that he would do sometime, but the time wasn't right. So she gave him all sorts of things, but he still was a man with an eye for the lasses. And soon all the pretty girls in the neighbourhood could be seen wearing golden necklaces and gold bracelets and gold rings covered in jewels. All the things that the mermaid had given to him to try to win him over, he was passing on to the local lasses. Now the mermaid started to grow annoyed with the length of time it was taking. She was expecting him to fall under her spell and also to the money would buy him, but he wasn't sort of having it really, he was being difficult. And so she started to watch him closely. Now, mermaids have incredibly sharp eyesight, and so she could be floating on the sea quite a distance away. He would never see her, but she could see him. And she saw him walking around the shore, and as often as not, he was not alone. He had a girl with him. And the jealousy started to brim up in her heart, and the anger started to rise in her breast as well as she watched him parading around the beach with these girls. And one day she caught the glimpse of gold being passed from him to her, and her looking at it in wonder and throwing her arms around him and kissing him. That was it. That was enough. So the next time that she met, she was still furious with him, but she didn't let it show. She sat on a rock and she sang and she scattered more gold coins and trinkets to him. And she said, of course, these are just nothing. These are just a trifle compared to what I have. You have more of this, you mean? Oh, yes, I've got a lot more of this. I have all the treasures from all the ships that has ever sank in the Pentland Firth. I keep them in a cave. Would you maybe like to see them? Yes, he said, I'd love to see them. Well, follow me. And she slipped into the sea and she swam along the shore, and he followed her on the land, walking along until they came to a headland. And he knew that area well. He was out fishing and all that. He knew that coastline like the back of his hand. But there was a cave in that headland that he'd never seen before. So he climbed down the rocks and he was able to walk into the cave. And there sat the mermaid singing. And when she saw the look on his face, she tossed her head back and laughed. Because there in front of him there was a mound of treasure, silver, gold, precious gems, all heaped up in a great mass. And she was sitting there among this great treasure, laughing and combing her long golden hair. And she sang a song. And as he was down on his knees, pulling up handfuls of this treasure and letting it slip through his fingers, picking up handfuls and pouring it over his head and laughing like a madman. She sang a song and he started to feel sleepy. And the more she sang, the sleepier he became until his head nodded down onto his chest and he fell asleep. When he woke up, it was dark and it was cold, and he was sore and stiff, and he tried to get up, but he couldn't. Something was holding him down. And when his eyes grew accustomed to the dark, he saw that the mermaid was sitting at his feet, and that he was fettered. He was lying on a rock with a golden chain wrapped around him, so he couldn't move. And then, well, she had him, and it was his fate to remain there, being watched over by the mermaid for the rest of his days. May still be there, I don't know.
He was pretty dumb as well as being greedy because of taking those girls on the beach.
Well, maybe not the sharpest tool in the box, but,
I do like a good gotcha ending.
Yes, it certainly is a gotcha ending.
Hello, friends. Just a reminder of how you can support our heritage work and help it to continue. Subscribing, comments, and positive reviews from wherever you listen will help other listeners to find us too. And sharing the podcast on social media is always helpful. You might also consider purchasing Orkneyology Press books and products from our Orkneyology.com website, which is also where you can find the show notes for this podcast. All of these are a great help. And if you're able, you might consider buying us an occasional dram. This is from our Ko-fi page, and you can find it at ko-fi.com/Orkneyology. We really appreciate your encouragement in any way you give it, even if it's just sending warm thoughts our way. Thank you so much. Enjoy the podcast.
What I decided to do with the Scottish Folktales Coast and Sea was to split it up into sections of the coast. So I had the east and north coast, Northern Isles, Western Isles, West Coast, and then there was a little aside tossed in there as well, which was a story that I tell about myself, which is actually an old traveller story, but about going out to sea in a boat and banging your head and being knocked out, and then when you wake up, you discover you've turned into a woman, and then it's a sort of story of how you have to try to get back, but in the end you don't want to, but you do anyway. But it's a great wee story. But there was one here as well from the west coast called The Castle of the Seafarer, which I'm indebted to Christina Stewart for helping me with the Gaelic, because as you will well know, I'm Arcadian and have no Gaelic, and we've never really spoken Gaelic here. I remember having an argument with a tourist in the museum once who said that Gaelic was spoken on, and I said no, it was never spoken. It was Old Norse was spoken here. And she says, but I heard people in the street and talking, and I'm sure they were speaking in Gaelic. And I said, well, maybe they were, but they would be very... But anyway, a lot of people, if there's folk that are really going, with a North Isles dialect, then a lot of folk just can't understand it anyway.
Hard for me at first, too.
So the Castle of the Seafarer, he is a man who is a privateer, basically. He's like a pirate. And he meets this girl who is a distant relation of his, a distant cousin. And he remembers her as being a little fat kid with red hair and stuffing her face with sweeties and having sticky paws, which ruined his clothes. And she remembered him as being a sort of brash, arrogant young man, boy. But then they meet when they're grown up. So this is about the two of them's, the romance. The captain and Katrina danced at the ball that he had arranged in her honour. There was hardly a time when you didn't see the red and green velvet of their clothes entwined as they danced the night away. Her copper and gold hair shone in the candlelight as they laughed joyfully together. He wooed her with songs and poems, and his words became more and more loving. She responded with pleasure. She felt her life had just begun, and a new life with this beautiful man who adored her, and who she adored in equal measure. Time passed, but the love that had made its home in their hearts remained, growing stronger with every passing hour. A gorgeous white silk wedding dress was ordered for the lovely bride-to-be. The castle had a wedding, the likes of which it had never known before. The couple were so happy that they had found each other, and it showed on their faces. Their joy was complete. They had given their hearts to each other, but that was a problem. The captain had no right to give his heart to Katrina, for it was not his to give. He already had a love, and one who would never give him up. You see, the captain's first love was the sea. And it ends all rather sort of tragically.
How does a woman compete with that?
Well, indeed. Bigger than you are for a start.
Yeah.
Among the stories that I gathered for that one as well was a very, very dark Selkie story that was from Duncan Williamson. And I had contacted Linda, who was his wife, and asked if it was her permission to use it. And she very gallantly allowed me to use a couple of his stories, and there's Death and a Nut is in there as well, which is a fabulous story. But this one was called The Selkie's Revenge. Now, there was once a minister who lived on the west coast of Scotland, and he had a very small church, and the area that he presided over was quite a large area, but it was very sparsely populated, so there wasn't many people there. So he did struggle to try to make enough money to provide for him, his wife, and their wee daughter Morag. He grew his own vegetables in the garden at manse, but he also went out fishing in his boat with a rod and reels and baited hooks. But he would also set a net across the mouth of the bay. So when the tide ebbed, fish would be caught in the net and he could go down and gather them up. But he had a problem, was the Selkies, because the seals would go and tear holes in his net. And he would also take bites out of the fish that were stranded there. And he hated the seals with a passion. Now, his wife, on the other hand, would say, "But my love, they're all God's creatures, and they have as much right to the fish as you do, maybe more so," she said. But he wasn't having any of it. The wee daughter Morag, on the other hand, she loved the Selkies, and she would sit by the shore and watch them lying on the rocks. Now, one day, the minister went down one Sunday morning before the service to check his net. He didn't want to leave it during the service because the gulls would get down and attack the fish as well and tear holes in them, and so he wanted to go down and when they were nice and fresh and gather them up. And as he was walking towards where his net was, he saw something splashing about in the rock pool. And when he got down to it, he discovered that it was a seal pup that had become caught in the net. And it hadn't caused any damage to the net. And he looked at it, and the hatred and the rage rose up in him, and he says, "Ya wee devil, you haven't made a hole in my net this time. But you'll grow, you'll become a big Selkie, and then you'll tear holes in my net. But I'll not give you the chance to do that." And he grabbed the wee defenseless seal pup by the back flippers, and he pulled it up, and he struck its head against a rock and killed it instantly. He then threw the body as far away as he could out towards the sea. And as he did that, he noticed that there was the head of a seal out in the bay, was watching him. He shook his fist at it, and it dived beneath the surface of the sea, and he went back home. He was raging when he got home, and he told his wife what he had done, and she said, "That's a terrible thing that you've done. You should not have done that." But he didn't care. Very shortly after that, his wife took ill. It was very sudden. She became very weak, and she just faded away, and in quite a short period of time, she was dead. And he was left alone then with wee Morag to try to bring up by himself. And he found it too much to try to write his sermons for the church and to tend to his vegetable patch. And he couldn't go out to the sea and fish. She was only 4 years old. She was too young to be left alone. So he decided that he would need to try to find a housekeeper that would look after her. So he put an advert in the local paper that he was looking for a housekeeper to care for them and to look after the wee girl. Now time passed, and there was one evening they were sitting down to the meal, him and wee Morag, when there was a knock at the door, and Morag said, "I'll go and answer that." And she ran to the door, and he shouted, "Who is it?" And she says, "Daddy, it's a lady." So he went over to the door, thinking that this was probably somebody that had come to, well, maybe see if they were doing all right, a neighbor, but maybe it was somebody that was needing to arrange a wedding or a funeral or a christening. When he got to the door, he saw that the woman standing there was a woman in maybe her mid-30s. She was very beautiful. She had long brown hair and large brown eyes. "Can I help you?" he said. "I believe you're looking for a housekeeper," she said. "Oh, yes, I am. "Well, I would like to apply for the post unless it's been taken." No, it hasn't. No, come in. They went inside, and the table was still set for the meal that they had just sat down to. And she looked at this, and the wee girl, wee Morag, had never taken her eyes off her the whole time that she was there. And she ended up wandering over. Now, usually she was a shy girl, but she wandered over to this woman who stretched out her arm and stroked the child's head. And the bairn came in close to her side and gripped onto her skirts and clung on to her. "Well, there's not a lot to do," he says. "All you have to do is just keep the house here and cook the meals and look after wee Morag. That's the main thing that you have to do. You can have all your meals with us. I'll pay you, and I can show you your room. You can stay here." "Now, but I haven't seen you around before," he says. "Are you new to the area or what?" And she says, "Yes, I don't come from here. I'm a widow, and I've just moved into the area, and I'm needing a place to stay and a job." "Well," he says, "come and I'll show you a room." So they went upstairs, and he showed her the room, and she was, fairly happy with that, and the terms were arranged, and so she went downstairs, but she didn't join them for a meal. But the wee girl was besotted with her. She was very taken with her. And so the time passed, and the wee girl started to come out of her shell. She was more like the child she used to be before she lost her mother. She had laughed for the first time since they had laid her mother in the ground. And she started to become much more outgoing. She was always a frail child, but she seemed to be growing in strength and vigor. But Selina, for that was the woman's name, used to take her down to the shore, and they would go swimming, and they would spend more and more time by the sea, regardless of what the weather was like. So the time passed, and the wee girl became more and more close, and this started to annoy the minister. He started to see that the wee girl was spending so much more time with Selina than she was with him. And also, whenever they were around, I mean, she was always sitting on Selina's knee. And they were always whispering to each other. It was like a house full of secrets. They whispered back and forth. And he started to feel resentful and jealous towards her. And this went on for another couple of months, and then he decided it was time to say something. He said, "What do you do all day down there at the sea? What is it you're up to?" And she says, "We just go swimming. Muir loves the sea, as I do, and we like to go down to the shore and we like to swim." Well, another thing is that you hardly ever touch your meals. I mean, your food is, I provide food for you, but you don't eat it. "I've never been a big eater," she said. "Well, I want you to start joining us more regularly at the meal table, and I want you to eat your meals with us. Is that understood?" "Perfectly." So she did join them as well at meal times, but she just picked at her food. And then, after a while, he started to notice that Muir was doing the same. She was only picking at her food as well. And also, they were still carrying on, whispering back and forth to each other. And the resentment in him built up. And in the end, he decided, "I don't care if it'll break the wee girl's heart, but Selina's got to go. I've got to get rid of her. She's a bad influence on the child." So he decided that he would maybe let her go, but he knew how much Muir loved her. And so he decided that he would give her one last chance. He would make an effort to try to do something with them together as a little group. And he remembered that he hadn't been fishing for a long time. So he declared that the next day they were going to take the boat and they were going to go out fishing. The next day they went down to the shore, and Selina and Muir got into the boat, and he pushed it into the sea and he jumped into her. Now, there was 3 benches on the boat. There was one at the bow, one in the middle, and one at the stern. The fishing rods were in the bow of the boat, and the minister was sitting on the middle one because he was operating the oars, he was rowing it, which meant that he was sitting facing towards the stern, towards where Selina and Muir were sitting. And again, the two of them were whispering to each other. And his temper rose. And he says, "I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to take my child away from me, aren't you? You're trying to come between me and my child. The only thing that I haven't left in the world, the only thing that I care about, the only thing that I love in this world, and you're trying to take her away from me." So Selina fixed him with a cold, hard gaze and said, "Just as you did to me." "What do you mean, woman? I've never done anything to you." "You took the only thing in life that I loved. I saw you. You picked up my child and you beat its head against a rock and killed it. But now I will have my revenge." And as she said that, she rolled over backwards, taking the child with her, and the two of them fell into the sea. The minister ran to the stern of the boat and looked over, but there was just a trail of bubbles coming up to the surface and then stopped. So.
It's a kind of an ambiguous ending, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the time that they're spending so much time at the sea, you get the impression that she's teaching the wee girl to swim. She's turning into a Selkie.
Right, yeah, it stops eating too.
But, because presumably they're getting fish. There's another little extract here from a lovely old Celtic myth called Princess of Land Under Waves. which is from the west coast, but this is, from the old kingdom of Dalriada, where Scots from Ulster settled in, around Argyll and southern Hebrides. So it features Finn McCool, who we normally see as being the protector of Erin, of Ireland. But there are many stories of Finn McCool throughout the Hebrides and the Highlands. And this one begins. Under the sea lies a magical kingdom. It can be seen on a calm day when no breeze ripples the surface of the water and the sun shines brightly. Land under waves is visible on such days, with its green valleys bejeweled with brightly coloured flowers that never fade or die. This land has green forests and sparkling streams with silver sand, golden rocks, and gems of all colours that glint in the light as the current of the streams turn them over. On one such day in May, the Fianna lay by the Red Cataract, where the salmon leaps, and they stared at land under waves, which was particularly bright that day. They gazed at the beauty of it in wonder, each wrapped in his own thoughts. Suddenly, they became aware that there was a small boat heading towards the shore, but they couldn't tell if it was on the surface of the sea or under it. The boat was being rowed with 2 oars, and there was a solitary person on board. The Fianna had wonderful eyesight, like the hawk, but Finn was the keenest of them all. It is a young lady who rows the boat, whose beauty is beyond all others that I have ever seen. The boat ploughs a furrow through the seas, which seems to stir the trees of land under the waves with every stroke of the oar. The lady landed her boat on the shore where the Fianna were waiting for her. She stepped lightly from the boat and walked towards Finn and greeted him. "My lady, from where have you come, and to what tribe do you owe kinship?" "I have come from land under waves, where my father is the king. I am in search of Finn McCool and Fianna. You are welcome, princess of land under the waves, and your quest is at an end." Leave it there because it goes into a story of protecting the woman, but then there is a whole other story, which is a wonder tale. So it's all about a journey in order to find water of life to heal her. So I love a wonder tale. So that was it. That came out 2024. Which to us now is last year. To people listening to this would be the year before.
Right.
But that I was due to do a book signing at the Arcadian Bookshop, but I ended up in hospital in Aberdeen instead on a drip. So I was properly poorly last year. So that. It never got promoted maybe as well as it should have. But then again, I think it was the start of 2025, I got an email from Nicola Guy at the History Press asking if I would do an interview to promote this next book, which is the Anthology of Scottish Folktales, Volume 2. Again, I was asked to select 2 stories from it, and I had to write a little introduction to that. So I selected The Mermaid Bride as the one story, and then the other one was, if I can find it, was Peary Fool, which again was found by Duncan J. Robertson on Rousey, probably from the same person as Kate Crackernuts. But what he did was he gave it to Andrew Lang, who was the man that produced the Rainbow Fairy books. So he was collecting folk tales. But the thing was, I don't know how much collecting he actually did, because he had people that went out collecting on his behalf. So that was the one story, and Kate Crackernuts came from Rousey, but it was always been put down as like in collections of Scottish folktales and English folktales as well. But I got an email from Nicola asking if I would do a interview with the Sunday Post. So with headfuls of the Bruins and Oorwully, which was their cartoons, which I was raised on, I said, yeah, of course, happy to do that. So I got a phone call from a reporter from the Sunday Post who had been on our website and had seen our love story on it. And that is what she was wanting to focus on, was an American woman meeting an Arcadian writer and storyteller through a story. And so that, formed the sort of basis of the article. And then right on the back of that, Nicola Guy got back in touch and said, would you do a collection of love stories, folktales of love? And I said, well, I suppose I could. I like a challenge. Hadn't really thought about it or anything, of course. Again, it was going to be for all of Britain. And I said, look, why don't we just do the same as we did last time? Because that kind of worked, I'll do one for Scotland, and you can have another one for Ireland and for England and Wales. So that's what they've done. I know that Colin Irwin is again writing the love one. I don't know who they've got for England or Wales. But then it all just came together because, as I said, I was very ill last year. I was so close to dying. And I got a visit from Elsa Dixon, who has also been featured on these podcasts. And I can't really say I was mentoring Elsa, because Elsa needs mentoring and storytelling like a bird needs flying lessons or a fish needs swimming lessons, She's more than capable. But having a dad that was from Orkney, I was passing on Orkney stories to her, and also a bit of information about the background to them, as much as I could, which I thought would be useful for a young person to, have that knowledge. It won't affect the stories any, but it's just good to know, Mm-hmm. And when she came by, she said, I was going to get you a get well soon card, but I brought you this instead. And it was a booklet of Icelandic stories by Hester Aspland. And she had collected these stories on the east side of Iceland. I knew the stories, but she had also illustrated them. And she had just graduated the previous year, 2023, from the University of Edinburgh with a first-class honours degree in fine art. And she is heavily influenced by the old artists like Arthur Rackham and Edmund Dulac, Kai Nielsen and John Bauer and all that, who are beautiful illustrations for folktale books around the turn of the century. And she wanted to illustrate books. So we will be working with her on books of our own as well. But I suggested to Nicola that they could maybe have her do the cover. And then I was also able to persuade them to have her do some illustrations in the book as well. So there's a few full-page illustrations, and there's some small pieces as well.
Full.
And I mean, they really are. So Scottish Folktales of Love is out on the 8th of January. I have my advanced copy here. And I was going to do a few readings from it and tell one story, but do a few short ones. This is Angus and Bride, Celtic myth. And it's about this season's Bera, the Cailleach, is the ruler in Scotland in the winter, who produces the the cold and the snow and such like. And she has kidnapped Bride because she is destined to marry her son Angus Angus the Young, and bring summertime into Scotland, which will, of course, weaken her power. I'm going to read you an extract. Beara knew Angus was destined to fall in love with Bride. That is why she captured the girl and carried her off as a prisoner. She had to prevent Bride from ever meeting her true love. But Angus saw Bride in his dreams. He saw her beauty, her gentleness, her grace, and he longed for her. He loved her with all his heart. When he woke, he went to ask the king of the Green Island to let him know who this fair maiden was. Last night, said Angus, I had a dream. I saw a beautiful maiden who was weeping by a stream. An old man was with her, with a white beard stood near to her, and I asked him why she was crying. He said that she was the prisoner of Beara and was treated cruelly. That was why she wept. I would give anything to set her free and to make her my wife. My heart belongs to her and to no one else. The king of the Green Isle said, The maiden you saw is Princess Bride. When you rule as the king of the summer, she will be your queen. Your mother Beara knows this and is trying to keep her from you, as she knows that once you marry Bride, her own power will diminish. I will leave in search of her now, said Angus, although it is still only February, the wolf month, as people have named it. I will borrow 3 days from August. I will weave a spell over the land and sea so that it will be calm. I will ride out on my white steed to search for Bride. I will find this maiden, this love of my dreams, and I will save her from my mother. So Angus borrowed 3 days from August and stilled the seas and rode to Scotland in search of Bride. He never rested but searched for his love during all these borrowed days of the summer. But he couldn't find her. Bride also saw Angus, the ever young, in her dreams. As he searched for her, her heart was bursting with love and joy. This handsome young man had stolen her heart. She knew that she was destined, that they were destined to be together. When she thought of him, warm tears would trickle down her eyes and drop on the ground. From every teardrop there would spring a violet, each one as blue as her eyes. Another Celtic story, which is rather beautiful, is, of course, is Tam Lin, which I mentioned earlier. And this is a young man that was carried away by the Queen of the Fairies when he's enchanted. So she's heard about him, this young woman, Janet, and she has decided to go into this green woods and try to see for herself if Tam Lin is real. She put on a dress of emerald green, and placing a fine band of gold around her head, she set off to explore the woods, the place filled with secrets and whispers. After walking for a long while through mossy, overgrown paths, she came upon a clearing, lit by the sun that shone brightly overhead. Within the clearing stood the magical well, just as the stories had told. To her surprise, she saw that she was not alone in this enchanted place, for a milk-white steed was tied by the side of the well. It paid no heed to Janet, but quietly grazed on the sweet green grass that grew there. Janet sat down on the moss-covered stone wall that surrounded the well and breathed deeply. A sweet perfume hung in the air, carrying a fragrance so overpowering that she became drowsy. She looked about her, to see what the source of the sweet perfume could be. Her gaze fell on a rose bush, covered all over with beautiful white blossoms. The perfume from the flowers drifted on the warm, gentle breeze. Janet plucked a white rose and fastened it to her green gown. No sooner had she done this than the man appeared before her. It was as if he had stepped out of thin air. He was tall and very handsome, and Janet gazed at him in wonder. He had black hair, black as a raven's wing, and eyes of soft, cool grey. In a soft, clear voice he said, "What brings you to my well, my lady, and why do you pick my roses?" "My father is the Laird of Cotahaw," she spoke boldly, "and I shall go where I please within its borders. I need to seek the permission of no one, sir." "Yes, indeed," said the man with a slight laugh. "You speak boldly, my lady, but surely you must know that this is the realm of the Fairy Queen. It is my duty to protect it on her behalf." The longer Janet spoke to the handsome knight, the stronger her feelings grew. Love was budding in her heart, which would bloom at the slightest encouragement from him. She spoke again to him. "What is your name, kind sir?" "They call me Tam Lin."
Mm.
So it's a really, really beautiful story.
Yeah.
And there was one from the Highlands which I'll just tell. This is a story called 3 Gifts. There was once a young woman in the Highlands called Margaret, who had been born with 3 gifts. She had a light hand for the baking, a light foot for the dancing, and a light heart to get her through the day. Now, she married a young man called Donald, who was a drover. He drove cattle from one place to another, to the markets to be sold, and he was often away for a while. And between them, they had a wee boy, a baby called Angus, and he was the apple of Margaret's eye. Now, one day, Donald had to go away to drive cattle up to Inverness, and she decided it was such a beautiful day, she would prepare something to eat, and she would take the baby out for a walk. So she walked and she walked for a while until she came to a little green mound, and she sat down on it by the side of a road. And she got out her flask of milk and her bread and cheese. When she noticed, in the distance, on the road, there was a little cloud of dust coming towards her. She sat and watched it intently for a while, and the little cloud of dust got nearer and nearer and nearer, until she eventually could see that there was a little figure inside the cloud of dust. So a wee man was walking along the road, the dusty road which was kicking the dust up. And when he got close to where she sat, she said, "Good morning to you, sir. How are you today?" The wee man stopped alongside her and stared at her, didn't say anything. She said, "You must be tired and thirsty being on the road. Would you like to sit down and share some of my food and milk with me? I've got plenty here for both of us." So the wee fella never said anything. He just grunted and sat down. She gave him half of her milk, and then she gave him half of the bread and half of the cheese. And they sat there, eating companionably enough in silence. And when he was finished, he stood up and he said, "Thank you. That was a very kind thing that you did for me, and I would like to do something for you in return. But all I have is this." And he took out of his pocket an old rusty horseshoe nail. He said, "I found this on the road. Take it, and it might do you good sooner than you think." She thanked the little man for the gift, and she put it into the pocket of her apron. And the wee man carried on off down the road again. Well, she took Angus back home, and she prepared his cradle and laid him down to sleep for the night. And she did all the things that she was supposed to do to protect him from the fairy folk, and she had a sprig of rowan lying on top of the blankets on the cradle. And as she sat by the side of the fire, she heard a terrible commotion outside, a terrible noise, like there was a fox in the hen house. So she got up and ran outside as fast as she could to try to chase away the fox. But when she got outside, she discovered that everything was silent. All was quiet. And she looked in the hen house, and the hens were all just sitting on their perches, roosting away, heads under their wings, quite the thing. No sign of any fox or any disturbance. So she went inside the house. And as soon as she got in, she had a laugh. Not a very nice laugh. And she looked down and she saw that the sprig of rowan was lying on the floor. She went over to the cradle and she looked in, and there lay a creature, old and gnarled and wizened, with long pointed teeth and long pointed claws, and it was saying, and she knew that this must be a changeling, that the fairies had produced the commotion, the noise outside, to lure her away from her baby, and they had stolen Angus and taken him away. Well, she sat by the side of the fire, tears rolling down her face, and she started to think, I want my baby back. Where would he be? Well, I think we all know where he'll be. He'll be in the fairy mound, which lies quite away from here, but it'll be the fairies that have stolen him. She had grabbed hold of this creature in the cradle, which tried to bite and scratch her, but she got him by the scruff of the neck and she threw him out the door, and he scuttled away, laughing as he went. The next morning, she got up with the light at the dawn. She set off on her journey, heading towards the mound where the fairies lived. And it was so far away that it was actually getting to be dark by the time that she reached there. She picked up a stone and she beat it against a stone that was protruding from the mound, and she struck it 3 times. And a door opened in the mound, and light streamed out, and she went inside. And there was the Queen of the Fairies, tall and beautiful, but oh, it was a cold beauty. Behind her stood an old woman who was holding the baby, her son Angus. I've come for my baby, she said. Oh, have you? Said the Queen of the Fairies. But it's not that simple. You want your baby back, do you? What would you give for your baby? I'd give anything, she said. Anything? Anything. Would you give your light hand for the baking? She said. Of course. And the Queen of the Fairies stretched out her long white arm and stroked Margaret's arm, and she could feel it go as heavy as a lump of lead. And after that, whatever she baked wasn't light and beautiful, and it was hard and solid. But that was nothing compared to getting Angus back. Now give me my child. Did I say I would? Said the Fairy Queen. It's not as simple as that. Now, you have a light foot for the dancing, don't you? I do. Would you give that for the child? Of course. She didn't need to think twice about it. The Queen of the Fairies stretched out her arm and she stroked Margaret's leg, and she could feel her leg go as heavy as a lump of lead. Now give me back my baby. Did I say I would? It's not that easy, you know. Now, I hear you have a light heart to get you through the day. Would you give your light heart for your baby? Now, that was the only time that Margaret had to stop and think, because she thought, if a baby is brought up in a home that hasn't no love in it, then that is no kind of upbringing. But still, she wanted her child back, so she said, I would. The Queen of the Fairies reached out her hand and she touched Margaret on the breast. And as she did that, she could feel her heart inside her grow as heavy as a lump of lead. And she said, now give me back my baby. Did I say I would? Said the Queen. Well, with that, Margaret pushed past them and seized the child from the arms of the fairy woman that held him, and she turned and ran out of the mound. And the fairies started to chase her. And with losing her light foot for the dancing, her foot was as heavy as a piece of lead. She couldn't run properly. She was tripping. And the fairies were around her, and they were all laughing at her and mocking her. And some were pinching at her and tearing at her clothes. They were just sporting with her. They were playing with her. But as she ran, she remembered that there was a stream ahead. And she knew that if she could cross running water, the fairies would have no power to follow her. So she ran towards the stream, but her heavy foot caught a tusk of grass, and she fell down flat on her face. Soon the fairies were around her and laughing, but as she fell, she heard a clink sound, something metallic hitting a stone. And when she looked down, she saw the horseshoe nail that the wee man had given her. And she picked it up, and then she remembered that steel is a great protection against the fairies. And when the Queen of the Fairies saw her holding that nail up towards her, she said, she has forged iron. She has forged iron. We have lost our power. And they all fled back to their mound again, to their hill. And the door slammed behind them, and Margaret was left outside with the baby. And she headed home. Now, she'd lost her light hand for the baking. As I said, everything came out solid and heavy. And she'd lost her light foot for the dancing, so she could never trip around and dance like she used to. But, you know, she'd got her baby back. And that was the only thing that was important. And so her light heart, to keep her through the day, started becoming lighter and lighter again, until it was as light and happy as it had ever been. I like a good fairy abduction myself, and that story I had from Bob Pegg, a wonderful storyteller and musician, lives in Strathpeffer. Great guy. And again, somebody we should have on here at some stage. Now, there was this fabulous story called The Green Man of Knowledge. And it's a long story. I told it during lockdown on Tales for Troubled Times, and it came in at 1 hour and 57 minutes. Had I known that, I could have spun it out a bit and gone over 2 hours. But, I mean, I had no idea what the time was because I was just telling stories to a microphone. I wasn't looking at a watch or anything. But anyway, Jack lives with his mother, who rears pigs, and he does nothing but sit and play cards with his dog. And that is it. And he has never, ever gone beyond their gatepost in all his 21 years. And when he turns 21, he declares that he is going to go out and find his fortune. And despite his mother pleading with him not to go, he sets off. After walking for a while, he came to a crossroads, which had 4 signposts, one pointing down each road. One of the signs said, "To the land of enchantment." "That's the road for me," said Jack, and he strolled down the road towards the land of enchantment. By now, Jack was starting to regret that he hadn't asked his mother for any food to bring with him on his journey. His belly was rumbling and he was hungry. On he went, until he came upon a stone water trough by the side of the road, all grown over with moss, but with cool, clear water in it. "I'm thirsty," thought Jack. "This is just what I need. Maybe it will fill me up a bit so I won't feel quite so hungry." As he bent down to drink, he noticed that he wasn't alone, for there, perched on the side of the trough, was a wee robin. "Hello, Jack," said the robin. "What's that? Did you speak just now?" "Yes," said the robin, "I did indeed. I said, 'Hello, Jack.'" "But how can you speak? You're a robin." "True, Jack, but you are in the land of enchantment now. All the birds and animals can speak here." "But how do you know my name?" "Oh, Jack, we knew you were coming. We've been waiting for you for 21 years. Now, you'll be hungry, I suppose. Follow me." And with that, the robin flew along the road with Jack following. The robin led him to a cottage and told him to go in, for his supper was ready, and then flew away. So, and that is just the beginning of Jack's adventures, because he meets the Green Man of Knowledge and he falls in love with one of his daughters, who then has to help him to escape the clutches and wrath of her father. It's a brilliant story. I absolutely love it. It came from John Stewart, who was a traveller. It was recorded by a School of Scottish Studies. It's brilliant. Love it. Anyway, there is also a story here, The Weeping Woman, which you may know a version of this from Iceland. Young people gathered at crossroads to dance, and they always said that you would see one of the triangles formed by the crossroads would be flat from people's feet dancing. And so people went there to dance, but a young woman went there as well, because she had lost her love. He had been drowned and was buried a long way away, so she didn't have a grave to sit beside, and that was the nearest that she felt closest to him, was to be at this crossroads. So one night she is there weeping. One night, along the road came a strange man on horseback. When he saw the dancing, a laugh broke from his lips. He pulled up his big black horse and lightly dropped to the ground, walking over to the dancers. No one paid much attention to him as he joined in the dancing, until they noticed that he was the best dancer among them all, as light on his toes as a cat. He swung the girls around with grace, his voice sweeter by far than any man's, and his laugh the loudest. All night long the stranger danced with him until under the lamp of the moon, until the young people started to drift off into the night. The numbers of dancers grew fewer and fewer, until in the end the stranger was left there alone. Only he was not alone. Sitting under the hedge, weeping, was the young woman who had lost her love. The sound of her lamentations drew his attention, and he strode over to where she sat. He observed her for a moment or two, and then said, "You were bonny once, a very bonny lass. I bet that you would be bonny again if you stopped your weeping. Your eyes are red and swollen from crying salt tears." "How can I be anything but heartbroken? How can I do anything but weep? My love is gone, and the tears I shed are for him. All your weeping and grieving will not bring him back, will not bring back the dead. All it does is to disturb them, so that they can't rest in peace in their graves. Come now, and dance with me." She looked at him, but couldn't see his face clearly as it was in shadow. She shook her head. "No, I will not dance with you." The man reached down and seized her by the wrist, pulled her to her feet and dragged her to the dancing place. She struggled, trying to break free, but he was too strong for her. He grasped her close and started to dance with her. "I will not dance," she protested. "Aye, you will," he replied. He whirled her around and around so fast that her feet barely touched the ground. As they danced, she looked up into his face, and suddenly that face was lit up by the moonbeams. She gasped in disbelief. It was the face of her true love, whose death she had been lamenting. "They said you were dead." "Did they now?" "They said that you were dead and buried." "Is that so? Oh, my love, my darling man, please never leave me again." "I have to leave here long before the break of day." "Then I will come with you. Take me with you wherever you go." "My dwelling place is small and low. I don't think you'd like it much. The walls are damp and it's dark. There is little more than room enough for me." "Then I will help you to improve it. With my help, we will make things better." "You'd be better off with another love." "You shall not go without me. I will follow you." "Come then, if you must, and climb up behind me." He pulled the woman up behind him onto the great black steed, and they set off at speed. I guess you're sort of figured out where that one's going.
No, we're good.
That was an old belief, that if you wept too much for the dead, that it disturbed them. They couldn't rest, because every tear that you shed fell on them, and they became soaking wet and cold and miserable. So there's a lovely Selkie story. There's two Selkie stories in here, both from Orkney. The one is my favourite Selkie story, beautifully illustrated by Hester. The other one is the Lady Odivere, which is a much longer one about a woman who is married by a man called Odivere, who swore the Odin oath to break up, to win her. She has been met by this man that she was once in love with, a brave knight, and she has fallen pregnant to him while Odivere is away, and now she is rocking the baby in the cradle and singing a lullaby to it. Then a voice behind her spoke, "Here I am, your bairn's father, although I'm not your husband, sweet. I know that you are my bairn's father, and I never loved anyone as much as you. But I have a good husband who is far away. Don't speak to me of that wretched man. I wish I had never seen his evil face. I will return here in 6 months' time to claim my son and to pay for your nurse's fee. Never let it be said that I do not pay my dues. But who are you, and where do you call home?" "San Emrevo is my name. I can walk on the land and swim in the sea. Among the ranks of the Selkie folk, I am the greatest king. My home lies west over the ocean, beyond Orkney's green isles. It is called Sulskeri, and all the thousands of Selkie folk that live there are under me. They are my subjects, and they must do as I command." "But how can you carry our baby to that cold home of yours over the waves? How can you prevent the sea from being our bairn's grave?" I will carry him on my back, wrapped in a sealskin. He will be in no danger. I need no boat to cross the water deep, and we will arrive at Sulskerry before the sun is high in the sky. But how will I know our son from the other seals that swim in the sea? His paws will be as black as soot, his body as white as snow. But my husband is a skilled hunter. What if he should shoot or club our son when he is in his sealskin? I have little fear of that, but what I do fear is that the cock-crows will find me here. I shall return in 6 months' time to claim my son. And with those words he was gone, and Lady Odivere was left alone again. And as we know from the song as well, the Selkie Sulskerry, what she prophesies comes true.
Which is an Orkney song as well, isn't it?
Yep, it is indeed. Now, the last reading I'm going to do is one that I call Danny, Daisy and the Devil. I generally rename things, but this is just my telling of it. But it's a story that comes from Stanley Robertson, one of the great traveller storytellers. I mean, the man was amazing. He was tall and thin. Our friend Sheila Fechney described them as being cadaverous, which is a wonderful description of Stanley. But when he got up on stage and started to tell a story, it was another Stanley, a different Stanley replaced him. And he could hold you in the palm of his hand. He could make you sob. He could make you roar and laugh. He was, anything. He was really amazing. But in this story, Daisy falls in love with Danny, who's a young traveller lad, and her father, who is a farmer, doesn't approve because he's a traveller. So both parents have it against Danny when a stranger comes into the area riding a big black horse, and he starts to try to woo Daisy, and she is having nothing of it because she wants to marry, her Danny. But the parents, when they hear that this wealthy man is trying to court their daughter, they want her to make an agreement with him and to marry him. So they eventually her resolve weakened, and she said that she would go for a walk with the gentleman. He wooed Daisy with sweet words that charmed and flattered her. She was a country lass, naive and innocent, and not used to dealing with such sophisticated gentlemen. His words wrapped themselves around her mind, and she fell under the spell of this handsome man. Her parents encouraged her as much as they could. Then, one moonlit night, he took her in his arms and said, "My dearest sweetheart, I cannot live without you. Will you do me the honour of being my wife?" Daisy was stunned. Her thoughts turned to Danny, her own true love. She was confused. What should she do? Was Danny coming back for her? Who was this man anyway? He was very evasive when it came to answering questions about himself or his family. And yet there was something about him that she couldn't resist. She needed time to think. "I will have to speak to my parents about this." "Yes, of course, but I need an answer from you in 3 days." And then he was gone. When she told her parents, they almost danced with joy. A rich husband? No more Danny the traveller boy? Daisy's father had made inquiries about the stranger. Everyone said that he was very respectable and very rich, but no one was exactly sure where he lived. What did that matter? Daisy had landed herself a wealthy gentleman, and that was all that mattered. One evening, just as the 3 days were coming to an end, Daisy and the gentleman went for a walk. They came to a burn, and Daisy sat down to take off her stockings to wade through the water. The gentleman did the same, but Daisy chanced to glance at his exposed feet. She gasped with a shock. The gentleman had a pair of cloven hooves. Daisy knew then who this mysterious gentleman was. He was the devil in one of his many disguises. So what happens to Daisy and Danny?
Buy the book.
You'll have to buy the book and find out. Scottish Folktales of Love. Beautifully illustrated by Hester Aspland. I mean, she really is incredibly gifted.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And we will also, the two of us, will be doing a book signing at the Arcadian Bookshop on the 17th of January between 1 and 3 p.m. I felt that it was only right to ask Hester to join us there because the illustrations that she has done in this book are absolutely incredible, and it contributes so much to it that I felt it was a very much a partnership. Whereas, well, I'd written the stories. The idea was that we were trying to get it out for Valentine's Day. So I had to work really fast to try to get the book put together, but also a book that I would be happy to have released under my name, because I actually rejected about 3 stories from it, which just didn't gel. They didn't fit in. They were perfectly good stories, but they just seemed to be out of place among the others.
These stories, they're tales of love, but they're not all romantic love.
No, there is the story of Bruni, who has to set off to get a wise woman who can heal to come and save the mistress of the house, who has always been kind to him, and he loves her. I mean, she's good to him. So it's not just about romantic love. It's love between father and, well, between parents and child, and vice versa. There's also a lovely Duncan Williamson story in there, I Love You More Than Salt, which is just a fabulous story. And so, yeah, there's a real kind of mixture, which I'm sure people will enjoy. And I'm very grateful to Nicola Guy for having faith in me all these years and invite me to do this. To Liz Shaw, who is the editor that worked with me. As you know, when I write something, I make very few changes. I know
what that way, I know.
I know what I want to say, and I say it. And I don't normally need to. There's a little bit of polishing, but it's not a fat lot. And there hasn't been much that, she's picked up on that. But Liz is fabulous to work with as well. And then we have Lauren Kent, who is their PR manager. She's sort of handling the publicity sides of things. And I have to say that, they really are wanting to throw a lot at this book. I think they have a lot of faith in it. And I hope that it is justified. I know that the Coast and Sea book had to be reprinted after 3 weeks. I don't know how many reprints it's gone through since. They only do small runs, but still, it's encouraging. But anyway, we shall see. But they have been a tremendous, they're wonderful people to work with, and I really can't thank them enough for all the faith that they have placed in me, and also just their understanding.
And the work that they've done to preserve so many of these stories, not just of yours, but of all these other books in their vast collection.
Yes, the folklore series is massive. They also have a series of ghost stories from different counties as well, and so there's a lot of folklore being preserved. And they have actually run the idea by me of writing another book, which would be slightly different from this. It wouldn't be collections of stories. But I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't know if it's going to happen. It's got to go before a board to see whether they decide it's a good idea or not.
But in the meantime, beautiful book, beautiful stories.
Scottish Folktales of Love. I do hope that you enjoy it. So the next time that the moon is full, we will have a guest. So you don't have to hear me droning on and reading badly.
You read very well.
No, I didn't. Anyway, but thanks very much, folks, for listening, for staying with us for so long. And a Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year.